In a village nestled between misty mountains, there stood a grand hall built entirely of polished bamboo. This was the heart of Master Koro's empire. He was a merchant lord, a man whose pride was as immense as his fortune, built upon selling exquisite bamboo instruments to the nobility. On this particular morning, the hall was filled with important visitors. Nobles in silken robes listened as Koro's voice, loud and confident, echoed off the walls. "For the royal commission," he announced, gesturing to a display of flutes and wind chimes, "I will create instruments worthy of a king's court. Each piece will be a testament to my skill, a legacy of my name." In the shadow of a great, carved pillar, his young apprentice, Aaron, watched silently. The boy's hands, calloused and skilled, were more comfortable with the rough texture of raw bamboo than with fine words. He was a quiet soul, observant and thoughtful, often spending his free time listening to the sounds of the forest that surrounded the village. As Koro spoke of tradition and his own greatness, Aaron's heart beat a nervous rhythm. He clutched a small, carefully folded piece of parchment in his pocket, a sketch he had made by moonlight. Gathering every ounce of his courage, he took a small, hesitant step forward. The floorboard creaked under his worn shoe. "Master," he whispered, his voice trembling like a leaf in the wind. "Forgive the interruption, but what if we could capture the very voice of the wind? A flute that does not just mimic a bird, but sings with the true spirit of the forest itself." Koro's wide, boastful smile vanished. He turned slowly, his eyes narrowing into cold, dark slits. The warmth drained from his face, replaced by a mask of icy displeasure. "Silence, boy," he thundered, the force of his voice making several nobles jump. "You understand nothing of true art, nothing of what pleases a noble ear. Your place is to listen and to learn from me. Only I possess the knowledge to create for this court." The room fell into a deep, uncomfortable hush. The nobles looked away, embarrassed for the humiliated apprentice. And in a quiet corner of the hall, partially obscured by a large decorative screen, an elderly investor named Lord Senna, who had been observing the entire exchange with a detached, thoughtful air, slowly raised a wispy white eyebrow. His keen, intelligent gaze was no longer on the powerful merchant, but fixed intently on the young apprentice who now stared at the floor, his dream shattered before it had even been fully spoken. The silence in the grand bamboo hall was heavy and suffocating, like a thick blanket. All eyes flickered between the furious merchant and the shamed apprentice, whose cheeks burned a bright, painful red. He wished the polished floor would open and swallow him whole. It was then that Lord Senna, his movements slow and deliberate, leaned forward in his carved chair. His voice, though soft and raspy with age, carried a surprising clarity that cut through the tense atmosphere. "A flute of the wind, you say, young man?" he asked, his eyes twinkling with a hidden light. "An intriguing notion. Tell me more about this idea." Hope, fragile and fleeting, sparked in Aaron's chest. He opened his mouth, a single word forming on his lips, but Master Koro was faster. The merchant stepped bodily between Aaron and the nobleman, his laugh a harsh, jarring sound that held no warmth. "Pay no heed to such childish fancies, my lord," Koro said, his voice dripping with false benevolence. "It is the daydream of a simple boy who has not yet mastered carving a simple whistle. He spends too much time in the woods, listening to nonsense. Such imaginative flights are beneath the consideration of this esteemed company." Aaron's shoulders slumped in defeat. The spark of hope died, replaced by a cold heaviness. He looked at the intricate patterns on the floor, the beautiful sketch in his pocket, now feeling foolish and insignificant. He felt the weight of the noble's stares, a mixture of pity, amusement, and utter disinterest. He nodded mutely, a single, sharp gesture of submission, and retreated back to his corner, making himself as small and invisible as possible. The meeting continued, Koro's voice quickly reclaiming its boastful, commanding tone as he detailed his own, more traditional designs. But Lord Senna's attention had irrevocably drifted. He no longer listened to the merchant's proud words. Later, As the meeting adjourned and the nobles began to mill about, Aaron slipped out of the side door, his head low, the weight of his humiliation pressing down on him. He had barely taken 10 steps into the courtyard when a shadow fell beside him. It was one of Lord Senna's personal attendants, a man as quiet and unassuming as his master. "The Lord Senna requests your presence," the man murmured, his voice barely a whisper. "He will be by the river bend, where the old willow tree dips into the water. Come when the moon is at its highest point, and come alone." Before Aaron could even process the message, the attendant melted back into the crowd, leaving the young apprentice alone with a whirlwind of confusion and a tiny, rekindled flicker of curiosity. The moon was a perfect, luminous pearl in a sky dusted with countless stars. Its light painted a shimmering, silver path on the slow-moving waters of the river. Aaron crept through the tall, whispering bamboo stalks that lined the bank, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. The night sounds of crickets and frogs seemed unusually loud. There, just as promised, under the graceful, trailing branches of the ancient willow tree, stood Lord Senna. The old nobleman looked ethereal in the moonlight, his fine robes seeming to glow. "You have a rare gift, boy," Lord Senna began, his voice as gentle and persistent as the river's current. "I have traveled far and seen much, and I have learned to recognize it. It is not just a skill in your hands, but a sensitivity in your heart. The forest, it speaks to you, does it not? You hear its music where others hear only noise." Aaron could only nod, his throat too tight for words. He was overwhelmed that someone of such importance was speaking to him, and speaking such unbelievable truths. "Master Koro's pride is a wall," Senna continued, his gaze sharp and knowing. "It blinds him to the true magic that exists just beyond his ledger books. You must build this flute, not for him, and not for glory. You must build it for the forest itself, for the truth of its song. Do this in secret. Let the bamboo guide your hands, not the expectations of men." He placed a gentle, age-spotted hand on Aaron's shoulder. The touch was light, but it felt like a benediction. "Remember, a song that can stir the wind can also stir the heart of a kingdom. True power lies not in command, but in harmony." He gave Aaron's shoulder a slight squeeze, then turned and walked away, his form disappearing into the thick tapestry of shadows beneath the trees. Hope, now stronger and more resilient, blossomed in Aaron's chest. He watched until the old lord was completely gone. Taking a deep, steadying breath of the cool night air, Aaron walked to the water's edge and selected a straight, promising piece of bamboo from a cluster growing there. As a sharp knife made the first, careful cut, a soft sigh seemed to ripple through the entire grove. It was not the wind. It was a whisper, a breath of words he could almost, but not quite, understand, sending a shiver down his spine that had nothing to do with the night's chill. Aaron froze, his knife poised in midair. His blood ran cold. The whisper came again, a sigh that curled around the bamboo stalks, seeming to emanate from the very air around him. It felt like a call, a deliberate summons. Leaving his tools by the riverbank, he stepped away from the water and deeper into the grove, where the moonlight struggled to pierce the thick, interwoven canopy. The air grew cooler and carried the rich, deep scent of damp earth and ancient, sleeping growth. His eyes, wide and adjusting to the deeper darkness, caught a movement. A figure emerged from behind a giant, gnarled bamboo trunk, as if woven from the shadows and moss themselves. It was an old hermit, his robes a tapestry of living moss and faded bark, his long hair and beard like tangled, silver roots. His eyes, however, were clear and deep, holding the patient light of 1,000 forgotten stars. "The forest remembers," the hermit murmured, his voice the soft, rustling sound of dry leaves skittering across stone. "It remembers every cut of the knife, every act of kindness, every instance of greed. You wish to play its song? Then you must understand its heart. Play its sorrow, and it shall play your truth." He reached out a hand, gnarled and strong like an old tree root, and from his fingertips fell a sprinkle of glowing, gold-green dust. It settled onto the piece of bamboo Aaron held, making it hum with a faint, vibrational energy. Before Aaron could utter a single word of thanks or question, the hermit simply stepped back, merging with the darkness between the trees. He was gone. The only proof he had ever been there was the trail of faintly glowing dust that led to a solid wall of bamboo and a lingering, earthy scent of pine and damp soil. Inspired and trembling with a mixture of awe and purpose, Aaron worked through the rest of the night in a small, hidden clearing he often used. The glowing dust on the bamboo seemed to act as a guide, illuminating the grain and showing his knife where to carve, how to shape the holes, how to balance the instrument. He worked not from his sketch, but from pure feeling, listening to the subtle, resonant hum of the wood under his fingers. As the first hints of dawn tinged the eastern sky with soft shades of pink and gold, he lifted the finished flute. It was simple, unadorned by carvings or paint, yet it felt alive and vibrant in his hands, warm to the touch. He took a steadying breath and brought it to his lips. He blew a soft, experimental note. The sound that emerged was not merely his own breath given voice. It was the sound of the forest waking. It was the gentle sigh of the wind through the leaves, the cheerful chatter of a hidden stream over smooth stones, the distant, lonely call of a morning bird. The trees around him stilled, as if listening. The constant flow of the river seemed to hush. The very air held its breath, captivated. And within the layers of that beautiful, otherworldly melody, he heard them again. The whispers. This time, they were clear, woven into the music itself. Beware. The voices of the grove seemed to sigh through the notes, a harmonious yet warning chorus. Beware the one whose heart is closed, who takes what is not his. This song is a trust, not a trophy. Unseen, hidden by a thick, shifting screen of bamboo, Master Koro watched. A poisonous jealousy, hot and bitter, coiled tightly in his stomach. He had grown suspicious of Aaron's secretive, late-night movements and had decided to follow him. Now he saw the flawless, simple flute. He heard the unearthly, perfect music that made his own finest, most ornate instruments seem like crude, clumsy noise in comparison. And he saw Lord Senna, who had appeared silently at the edge of the clearing, drawn by the melody. The old nobleman was not just listening. He was captivated, entranced, with tears tracing glistening paths down his weathered cheeks. This was not just a flute, Koro realized with a jolt. This was a key to the king's favor, to undreamed-of wealth and prestige, to a legacy that would dwarf his own. And it was being crafted by a mere apprentice, a boy he considered his property. This foolish, ignorant boy, Koro muttered to himself, his voice a venomous, barely audible whisper. His hands clenched into tight fists at his sides. He stumbles upon greatness he cannot possibly comprehend. He holds a fortune in his hands and sees only a song. If he earns the king's ear with this, I will be nothing, a forgotten, obsolete merchant, a laughingstock. The thought was unbearable. He would not allow it. That night, under the cover of a moonless, pitch-black sky, Koro moved like a shadow through the sleeping village. He knew every crack and crevice of the compound. He picked the simple lock on Aaron's small, isolated workshop with ease, the clicks sounding unnaturally loud in the silence. Inside, the faint starlight coming through a single window glinted off the finished flute, which lay on a bed of soft, undyed cloth on Aaron's workbench. It seemed to hum with a soft, internal light, a pulse of contained energy. Greedily, his heart hammering, Koro snatched it up, clutching the warm, smooth wood to his chest. A cold, hard determination settled over him. He could not leave any evidence of Aaron's work. He could be the sole origin of this miracle. He grabbed Aaron's other projects, the half-finished flutes, the careful sketches, the notes on tonality and wind flow, and with a grimace, smashed them under the heel of his heavy boot. The sound of splintering bamboo and tearing paper filled the small room. Satisfied, he slipped back into the night, the stolen flute hidden securely within the folds of his rich robes. As the first faint light of dawn began to touch the horizon, painting it in muted grays, Aaron awoke with a sudden, inexplicable feeling of dread. He rushed to his workshop, his sleep-filled mind hoping it was just a bad dream. He found the door slightly ajar. His heart shattered into a million pieces at the scene of wanton destruction. His work, his dreams, were splinters and scraps. And on the floor, amidst the ruins of his passion, lay a single, formal scroll tied with a royal seal. It was a summons from Lord Senna. He and his flute were to present themselves before the king at the palace. Today, Koro arrived at the palace first, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm of fear and triumphant anticipation. He was announced to the court with great ceremony, the stolen flute concealed within an ornate, velvet-lined box he had brought for the occasion. He bowed deeply before the king, a stern man with a crown of woven silver, and the assembled nobles, his eyes briefly meeting the calm, observant gaze of Lord Senna. "Your Majesty," Koro proclaimed, his voice ringing with a confidence he did not entirely feel. "I have toiled in solitude for many moons, guided by a divine inspiration that visited me in a dream, to create an instrument worthy of your legendary court. Behold," he opened the box with a flourish, "the flute of the four winds. It does not merely make music. It commands the very breath of the world, a symbol of the prosperity that will bless your reign." He held the simple, unadorned bamboo flute aloft. It looked strangely humble and out of place in his thick-fingered hands, a stark contrast to the opulence of the great hall. A murmur of curiosity and skepticism ran through the crowd. The king leaned forward on his throne, his expression one of keen interest, his fingers steepled under his chin. He gestured with a jeweled hand, his voice deep and commanding, echoing in the sudden quiet of the throne room. "Then demonstrate its power, Master Koro. Play for us. Let us all hear this miracle for ourselves." A smug, triumphant smile touched Koro's lips. This was the moment he had stolen, the moment that would cement his legacy. He brought the flute to his mouth, took a deep, theatrical breath, and blew with all his might. Nothing, not a whisper of sound, not a single note. A confused, uneasy ripple passed through the nobles. Koro's eyes widened in panic and disbelief. He tried again, blowing harder, his face turning a blotchy, desperate red. Still, only a hollow, empty rush of air escaped the instrument. The silence was deafening, mocking. Then, a faint, cold wind swept inexplicably through the great hall, though the tall windows were sealed shut. It was a sorrowful, lonely wind that carried the scent of decaying leaves and made the fine tapestries lining the walls tremble. From the silent flute in Koro's hand came a low, mournful hum, a sound of deep and profound loss, as if the forest itself was weeping. The beautiful melody Aaron had created was gone, replaced by this ghostly, grieving echo. The bamboo pillars supporting the high ceiling began to vibrate, emitting a low, threatening groan that seemed to come from the earth itself. And on that unnatural wind, a whisper, audible to everyone in the hall, swept through the room. "The forest has been betrayed." The simple bamboo flute in Koro's hand began to crack, fine, dark lines spreading across its surface like forked lightning. A ghostly storm of pale, silvery bamboo leaves materialized from the still air, swirling around him in a furious, shrieking vortex. Koro dropped the flute as if it had burned him, clutching his throat as he collapsed to his knees, choking and gagging on an invisible, bitter dust that filled his mouth and lungs. The nobles shrank back in terror, some shielding their faces, others crying out in fear. The king rose from his throne, his face a mask of stunned alarm. At that precise moment, the great, carved doors of the hall burst open. Aaron stood there, breathless and disheveled from his frantic run, his face pale with horror and understanding. He took an entire scene in a single, devastating glance. The cursed storm, his master writhing on the floor, the broken flute. His heart ached for the grove's pain. "Stop!" he cried out, his young voice cutting through the supernatural chaos with surprising strength. "You must stop this. You have angered the grove. This magic was never meant for a lie. It is a voice, not a weapon. The ghostly wind died down as suddenly as it had begun, the phantom leaves dissolving into mist. The court was left in a stunned, trembling silence, the air thick with the aftermath of magic. All eyes turned to the panting, desperate apprentice who stood in the doorway. The king, his composure slowly returning, rose from his throne, his expression a volatile mix of anger, confusion, and awe. "Explain this sorcery, boy," he commanded, his voice echoing in the hush. Aaron fell to his knees, not in cowering fear, but in a gesture of deep respect for the king and the wounded forest. He kept his eyes on the floor as he spoke, his voice clear and earnest. "Your Majesty, the flute is not a tool for command. It is a voice. It is the voice of the bamboo grove, which has protected our village since time began. It sings only for the hands that carved it with respect and a pure heart. I made it guided by the forest itself, but it was stolen from me this very night." He spoke not to accuse Koro, but to explain the source of the forest's righteous wrath. He told them of the whispers by the river, the ancient hermit, the glowing dust, and the true, gentle purpose of the song. Before the king could respond, Lord Senna stepped forward from the crowd of nobles. His face was solemn, his bearing dignified. His voice was steady and clear, carrying the immense weight of his years and his unwavering honor. "The boy speaks the truth, Your Majesty," he declared, looking directly at the king. "I was a witness to the flute's creation. I heard its true, blessed song. The theft is Master Koro's crime. The curse is the forest's judgment." Koro, freed from the invisible dust, crawled on the polished floor towards the throne, his fine robes torn and disheveled, his face streaked with tears of pure terror. "Forgive me, Your Majesty. I was blind. I was a fool. The greed, it consumed me," he begged, his voice a broken, rasping thing. The king looked down at him, his face hard and impassive, showing no mercy. "The forest has already passed its sentence upon you," the king said, his words cold and final. "But the kingdom must also deliver its own. You will return this cursed flute to the very spot from which its bamboo was taken. You will offer your worthless apologies to the grove you have so deeply wronged. Perhaps the spirits will be more merciful than I." Royal guards in gleaming armor stepped forward, their faces stern. They pulled the sobbing, broken merchant to his feet. He was half dragged, half carried from the grand hall, a pathetic figure, his pride utterly shattered. The entire court watched him go, a collective shiver of fear and realization running through them. The power they had witnessed was not of kings or armies or men. It was older and far more profound. As Koro was led out of the palace and towards the edge of the now silent, waiting bamboo grove, the stalks began to tremble, not with music, but with a deep, resonant, and furious energy. The guards, their hands on the hilts of their swords, shoved Koro into the small, hidden clearing where Aaron had carved the flute. The air was thick, heavy, and difficult to breathe, charged with a palpable anger. "Do it," the captain of the guard ordered, his voice tight with nervousness as he and his men kept a safe distance. Koro, trembling uncontrollably, took the cracked, dark flute from his pocket. It felt cold and dead now. He fell to his knees, scratching and digging at the earth with his bare, soft hands, trying to bury the cursed object and be done with it. But the soil itself seemed to push back against him, the hard, packed ground refusing to accept his offering, as if it were repulsed by his very touch. As he frantically scrabbled in the dirt, thick, rope-like roots, dark and slick, erupted from the ground with terrifying speed. They coiled around his legs, his arms, his waist, pulling him downward with immense, inexorable force. He let out a single, strangled cry of utter terror as the roots pulled him into the earth itself. It was not a violent swallowing, but a slow, deliberate embrace, the soil parting and then closing over him, drawing him into its dark, final embrace. The struggle was short, and then an absolute, eerie silence fell. The grove was still once more. The next morning, the guards returned, their hearts filled with dread at what they might find. Koro was gone. There was no sign of a struggle. Where he had vanished, a single, vibrant green bamboo shoot pushed up from the disturbed soil, glowing with a faint, unnatural, and sickly green light. Aaron felt no sense of victory, only a hollow, aching sorrow for his master's tragic fate and a deep, empathetic pain for the wounded forest. He walked back to the clearing and collected the pieces of the broken flute, their surface now dull, cold, and lifeless. Lord Senna found him later, sitting by the river, the fragments cradled in his lap like a dead bird. The forest punishes greed with a heavy hand, Aaron, the old lord said gently, sitting beside him. But it also remembers humility. It is not finished with you yet. The song must be made whole again. The harmony must be restored. You must try, for the grove's sake, and for your own. Aaron looked at the kind, wrinkled face and saw the unwavering belief there. He knew, in his heart, that the old lord was right. He had to face the grove again, to listen to its pain, to acknowledge its anger. He had to answer its fury not with fear, but with understanding and a plea for healing. Clutching the broken pieces, he walked back towards the bamboo forest, his heart heavy with a solemn purpose. He entered the deep shade of the tall, silent stalks and stood waiting, hoping for a sign, for a single, forgiving whisper in the now quiet and wounded air. The air in the clearing grew suddenly cold, and the hermit was simply there again, standing beside the new, glowing shoot that marked Koro's end. His ancient eyes held no judgment for Aaron, only a deep, timeless patience and a trace of shared sorrow. The first flute was born of innocence and wonder, the hermit said, his voice the soft crackle of a dying fire. This one must be born of peace and reconciliation, carved not for praise, nor for glory, nor even for forgiveness. Carved to heal, carved to restore the silence that has been broken. But know this, child, and know it well. The song it makes will reveal the true landscape of your heart. It will mirror every intention. He gestured to the bamboo around them, to the very air that still thrummed with residual hurt. Aaron nodded, understanding the immense weight and responsibility of the task. He sat down, taking out his carving knife and a fresh, strong piece of bamboo that the hermit offered him. As he began to work, slowly and meticulously, the shadows between the trees seemed to shift and congeal. Faint, shimmering forms of the forest spirits, translucent, ethereal beings of light and leaf, circled him, watching his every move. Their presence was a cool, gentle pressure on his skin, a silent test of his focus, his purity of intent, and the strength of his compassionate heart. Aaron worked with a slow, deliberate rhythm, his every cut a silent prayer, his every careful stroke an act of contrition and love. He thought of Koro's disastrous fall, not with anger or vindication, but with a profound pity for the man who had been consumed by his own emptiness. He poured his hope for the forest's recovery, his wish for peace, into the very fibers of the bamboo. When he was finally finished, the new flute looked similar to the first in shape, but it felt entirely different in his hands. Lighter, warmer, as if it were already filled with sunlight. He took a deep, calming breath, centering himself, and played. The melody that flowed out was one of profound, gentle healing. It was the sound of the first rain after a long drought, quenching the thirsty earth. It was the feeling of warm sunlight filtering through a dense canopy after a storm. It was the sensation of a deep wound slowly, miraculously closing, of scar tissue forming stronger than before. A warm, golden light emanated from the flute, spreading through the grove in visible, pulsing waves. The leaves on the trees shimmered, looking greener and more vibrant with each passing note. The very air felt cleaner, lighter, easier to breathe, as if a poison had been cleansed. Life, vivid and joyful, surged back into the clearing. Then a soft, deliberate cracking sound drew his eye. The bamboo shoot where Koro had vanished split cleanly open, not with violence, but with a sense of release. Inside, resting on the fresh, pale pulp, was a single, perfectly formed seed, no bigger than his thumbnail, that pulsed with a soft, steady, and healthy green light. Holding the new, warm flute and the mysterious, living seed, Aaron returned to the palace. The court received him with a nervous, hushed respect, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and fascination. The king looked at the simple instrument in Aaron's hands, a flicker of apprehension in his eyes. The memory of the cursed wind and the swirling phantom leaves was still vivid and terrifying in everyone's mind. "You return to us with another flute," the king said, his voice cautious and measured. "The merchant is gone, consumed by the magic of the first. What song does this one carry, young craftsman? Will it bring another storm, or has it been tamed? Will it bring a curse or a blessing?" The entire throne room leaned in, waiting, their breaths held in a collective, anxious suspense. Aaron did not speak. He knew words were inadequate. He simply bowed his head in a gesture of deep respect to the king and to the power he served. He lifted the flute to his lips, his hands completely steady. And as he prepared to play, the same strange wind that had filled the hall for Koro began to stir once more, rustling the silks and velvets of the nobles, making them gasp and shrink back. Aaron played, but the wind that had been eerie and cold for Koro now felt warm, gentle, and fragrant like a spring breeze. The sound that filled the hall was not just music. It was a living story, a healing narrative woven from sound. It was the whisper of new leaves unfurling, the laughter of a clean, flowing stream, the gentle patter of rain on a still pond, and the soft, acknowledging sigh of grief remembered, honored, and finally released. It was a tapestry of life itself, in all its beauty and sorrow. The nobles, who had listened to 1,000 flawless concerts without a single tear, now found their eyes stinging, their throats tight with emotion. Hardened warriors, who had faced death without flinching, felt a lump form in their throats and a strange warmth in their chests. The music bypassed their minds and touched a place deep within their souls, a forgotten memory of innocence, peace, and connection. Even the king, on his mighty, elevated throne, felt the heavy, bejeweled crown upon his head tremble ever so slightly, as if bowing its head to a power greater than any crown, the power of true, restorative harmony. Lord Senna, watching from the side, closed his eyes, a serene, peaceful smile gracing his aged face. A single, clear tear of joy traced a path through his wrinkles. "It is done," he whispered, so softly only he could hear. "The balance is restored. The grove forgives." The king stood, the last, sweet notes of the music still hanging in the air like a delicate, sweet perfume. From this day forward, he declared, his voice now filled with a newfound reverence and humility, "Aaron shall be known and recognized as the royal craftsman of the wind, a title bestowed by this court and protected by this crown. His name shall be spoken with honor." Aaron bowed deeply, but when the king gestured for servants to bring forward chests of gleaming gold and scrolls granting him a title of nobility, the young man shook his head, a small, peaceful smile on his face. "Your Majesty, I am grateful beyond words, but I am, and will always be, merely the forest's apprentice. My place is there beside it. My only wish is for the bamboo grove to be protected forever, so that its song may never again be silenced or twisted by greed." The king, deeply impressed by such profound wisdom in one so young, immediately decreed the grove and the land around it a royal sanctuary, forbidden from any logging or exploitation. That night, as Aaron slept in his humble home beside the now peaceful grove, a gentle, fragrant wind blew through his open window. It carried no words, but a feeling, a profound, ancient, and unmistakable sense of gratitude that filled his dreams with deep, untroubled peace. Aaron returned to his simple life beside the grove, its appointed guardian. He saw that the single glowing bamboo shoot had grown with unnatural speed into a tall, magnificent stalk, its leaves shimmering with a soft, internal, silvery light. Curious, he approached it. He gently tapped the stalk, and it resonated with a pure, bell-like tone that hung in the air. A section of the stalk then hollowed itself out seamlessly, and inside, resting on a bed of velvet soft, emerald-green moss, was a crystal. It was not a gem mine from the earth, but a perfect, solid drop of music itself, perfectly clear and humming with a gentle, potent power. He knew it was a gift from the forest, a tangible seed of the healing song he had played, a physical manifestation of its gratitude. As he held it, feeling its warm vibration in his palm, the hermit appeared one last time, his form almost transparent in the dappled sunlight. He looked at the crystal and then at Aaron, a serene, final smile on his face. Every act of greed, when met with grace and understanding, turns to wisdom, the hermit whispered, his voice fading like an echo. You have tended this garden well. Now the forest tends to you. And with those words, he was gone, not vanishing, but simply becoming one with the light and the air. The kingdom entered a new era of peace and reflection, celebrated each year with a festival of winds. The air would fill with the sound of flutes, all crafted by Aaron's hands, each carrying a faint, beautiful echo of the grove's true song, though none possessed the raw magic of the originals. Villagers and nobles alike swore that when these melodies were played in the town square, long-standing arguments would be forgotten. Sick children would fall into a deep, healing sleep, and hardened hearts would soften and open. The music was a balm, a reminder of the harmony they had all witnessed. During one such joyful festival, a young, ambitious noble, who had only heard the terrifying tales of the cursed flute, approached Aaron. "Master Aaron," the noble asked, his voice full of a morbid, greedy curiosity. "The first flute, the one that silenced Master Koro, does it still exist somewhere? Could such immense power ever be understood, perhaps even controlled by the right person?" Aaron, who had been smiling warmly at the celebrating children, grew still. His eyes, usually so calm and clear, darkened with the unpleasant memory of roots and choking dust and a master's betrayal. He looked away from the noble, towards the silent, deep, and sacred parts of the grove, but offered no answer, his silence itself a warning. The noble's unsettling question planted a seed of unease in Aaron's own heart. He felt a pull, a need to know the final fate of the first flute, to be certain it could cause no more harm. He walked deep into the protected grove, to the very clearing where Koro had vanished. There, at the foot of the now tall, softly glowing bamboo tree that had grown from his master's fate, lay the original flute. It was not broken, nor had it decayed. It was whole, seemingly untouched by time, resting on a bed of lush, green moss. But it was profoundly changed. Its bamboo was a deep, dark, almost black color, and it hummed with a low, persistent, sleeping vibration, like the slow, steady heartbeat of a buried secret. He reached a hand towards it, but stopped just short of touching it, as the hermit's final warning echoed loudly in his memory, a protective shield. "The past never truly dies, child," the voice seemed to whisper on the wind. "It only sleeps, waiting for a careless hand to wake it. Guard your heart above all else. Do not wake what you may not have the strength to put to rest." News of the powerful, magical artifacts in Aaron's care, the healing flute and the legendary cursed one, had spread far beyond the kingdom, twisted and exaggerated in the telling. A new merchant, sleek, wealthy, and dressed in foreign silks, arrived at the edge of the grove. He had heard the legends and smelled an opportunity. "Master Aaron," the man said, his voice slick with false charm and his eyes sharp with avarice. "I have representatives from empires across the sea who are desperate for the first flute. They are men of power, of vision. They would pay a fortune beyond counting for such a persuasive object. Think of the wealth, the influence. You could live in a marble palace, not this simple hut." He gestured dismissively at Aaron's home. "You need not live in such rustic hardship." As the merchant spoke, weaving a tapestry of temptation, Aaron found his eyes drifting back to the dark flute lying in its clearing. In its polished, obsidian-like surface, He seemed to see a flicker of a familiar, tormented face, a ghost of the man consumed by the very greed this new merchant represented. A whisper, thin and cold as a winter stream, coiled into his mind. It was Koro's voice, a desperate, haunting echo. "We could have ruled together, boy," it hissed, a siren song of power. "You with the magic, me with the ambition. Power and wealth beyond your simplest imaginings. It is not too late. Think of what we could have been. Think of what you could command." For a single, terrifying moment, Aaron felt the seductive pull of that dormant, dark power, the temptation to use it, to be more than just a guardian. The temptation was a cold, hard stone in his chest, a weight that threatened to pull him under. Aaron looked from the merchant's greedy, gleaming eyes to the dark, humming flute, and then down at the pure, music seed crystal he wore on a cord around his neck. He thought of Koro, pulled into the unyielding earth. He thought of the healing song and the warm, forgiving light that had filled the throne room. He knew, with absolute certainty, what he had to do. He could not sell it, and he could not hide it. Its very existence was a temptation for the next greedy soul. He sent the merchant away with a firm, silent shake of his head. Then, he took the cursed flute and walked to the riverbank where his journey had begun, where Lord Senna had first believed in him. He did not smash it. He did not bury it. He lifted it to his lips one final time. He did not play a song of power or control or sorrow. He played a song of release, a melody of letting go, of unburdening, of setting a trapped spirit and a trapped power free from its earthly form. As he played this final, gentle requiem, the dark bamboo of the flute began to glow from within, not with a cursed light, but with a pure, brilliant, blinding white. The flute grew warm in his hands, then hot, and then it dissolved into 1,000 points of shimmering light, like a swarm of benevolent fireflies, which were immediately caught by the wind and carried away, up and over the bamboo grove, vanishing into the vastness of the sky. From the corner of his eye, Aaron saw the hermit one last time. The ancient spirit bowed to him, a deep, respectful, and final gesture of farewell, and then turned, walking into the deep forest mist until he was nothing but a memory and a blessing. Years flowed into decades like a gentle river. Aaron grew into a wise, gentle, and much-loved old man, always the faithful guardian of the grove. Children playing in the village would often stop their games and point to the sky, their faces alight with wonder. "Listen," they would say to each other. "You can hear Master Aaron's flute in the wind today. And if you were very quiet and your heart was open, you could." A faint, beautiful melody of peace and harmony was always woven into the breeze, a constant, gentle reminder of the balance between humanity and nature. The bamboo grove thrived, taller, denser, and more vibrantly alive than ever before, its stalks singing softly to each other in the wind. Travelers who passed through the village would always be told the tale of the proud merchant and the humble apprentice. And if they were wise, they would walk to the edge of the sacred grove, listening closely. They swore the bamboo itself hummed a constant, gentle warning, a lesson etched into its very fibers, a whisper on the wind for all who had the ears to hear. Greed silences, but kindness echoes forever.